Every guitar recording you've ever made sounds like shit. Unless, of course, you're using an Axe Effects, in which case it sounds pretty good. And identical to everyone else's shit that's using an Axe Effects. But let's say just for laughs, you decided to break free from that cult of digital mediocrity and just actually mic'd up a real amp. You know, like Crom intended. Only to be met with a harsh, fizzy nightmare that sounds like an AM radio being fed through a blender full of marbles. So now you're asking yourself, why is this so fucking difficult? Simple. Because the entire process is built on a 60-year-old workaround that refuses to die. A workaround that's been duct taped, mythologized, and sold to you as gospel truth. And the infuriating bit? That piece of shit mic you've been told to use? Yeah, that was designed before man walked on the moon. It's not classic, it is obsolete. But guess what? Now there's a way to get an actual recorded guitar sound from a real amp without going insane and without spending thousands of dollars. Without post EQ and without secret multi-band compression settings that everybody stole from Andy Sneap. Embrace yourself, it's not even using an amp sim. It's called using the right fucking microphone. Let me show you what this is all about. Let's be real clear. I'm going to say something mildly controversial, and that the SM57 didn't become king of guitar mics because it was actually good. It became king because it was the cockroach of microphones. Ugly, primitive, and impossible to kill. Nobody loved it. Nobody ever said, wow, this captures my guitar sound perfectly. Most of us threw a mic up in front of a cabinet and scratched our head for the next 10 years saying, why the fuck doesn't this work? However, it just refused to die, and we still kept using it. Shure rolled it out way back in 1965. Engineers grabbed it for snares and for live sound because it could survive getting smacked with a stick and dropped into a beer. Meanwhile, ribbons and condensers actually sounded great, but they were expensive, fragile, and if you stuck one in front of a cranked Marshall, and here's the important part, at volumes that you needed in the early 70s to get power tube saturation, you basically just bought yourself a $1,500 paperweight. Now, by the late 70s and 80s, the 57 had become the default guitar mic. Not because it was accurate and not because it was some magical tone secret, but because it was cheap and indestructible and barely passable. And most importantly, the big name albums everybody worshipped were recorded with them. So the myth reinforced itself until it became dogma. The 57 didn't win because it was good, it won because it was on hand. It was a piece of tech so basic and indestructible that humanity just gave up and built an entire religion around it. Here's the problem with religions. They don't adapt. They just keep repeating the ritual even when the results suck. Which brings us to the real nightmare for the home recording musician. If you take two of the most popular tools, an SM57 and a Celestion Vintage 30, but you just happen to be unfortunate enough to have purchased one of those speakers that was made between 2006 and 2020, congratulations, you've just stepped into your own personal 9 circles of audio hell. It is extremely difficult for a young, inexperienced engineer to get good results with that combination, especially with high gain tones. Because you've got a microphone that will boost your signal at 5 kilohertz by about 6 decibels. And when you combine it with one of those lovely vintage 30s from what I can only describe as the dark ages, which add in an extra 12 to 18 decibels at 6 kilohertz compared to their modern made in UK counterparts, but are unchanged from the ones made in the late 90s according to the marketing, you're not gonna have a good time. You'll spend hours nudging that mic a millimeter at a time, desperately trying to dodge the ice pick in your forehead fizzy top end until you finally give up and convince yourself that it sounds okay. Here's the thing, it doesn't. It never did. You just developed Stockholm Syndrome with a dynamic microphone. And trust me, I have been there. I've got spiral notebooks full of diagrams and data. I made those notes in some sad, feeble attempt to make this combination work because this is what everybody on the forums said would work. But little did I know that they should have just stamped those speakers with a giant warning label that said, don't even fucking try miking this with the 57 if you value your sanity. Meanwhile, all those killer album tones I was trying to emulate, those came from speakers made at least 5 years earlier than the ones I had, back when Celestion was still building them in the UK, when quality control wasn't just a punchline. And this is the reason the Dynamount was invented. So you could literally move your microphone millimeter by millimeter without even leaving your mix position, just to squeeze out something passable from the worst creative combination since adding Rose and Jar Jar Binks into Star Wars. The late great Steve Albini made a fantastic video about how to mic a guitar cab. And surprise, surprise, he committed the ultimate sin in it. He put the mic dead center on the speaker. I know! Heresy! Somewhere out there on the internet, a gear forum just caught fire. Now, what Steve explains, and very calmly without screaming like clouds like I might from time to time, is that the center of the speaker is the most accurate representation of the signal that the amplifier is producing. As in, the place where your amp is actually producing the sound is the place where you should maybe try pointing the microphone. Wild concept. Almost kind of like common sense, which is hilarious because that is exactly where I put the mic the very first time I ever tried recording a guitar amp way back in the mid-90s sometime. Back when I knew absolutely nothing and hadn't yet been indoctrinated into the church of the cap edge. But then I read the internet, and that's when the sacred texts appeared. You must mic the cap edge. You must angle it precisely at 37.5 degrees. You must form the sacred mic placement triangle of doom, or your tone will suck and your crops will fail. And that is where my nightmare began. Thousands of takes, a million phase problems, and an entire decade wasted trying to fix it in the mix because someone with a username like ToneWizard42069 said it was more musical. Now, Steve had the advantage of using incredibly expensive ribbon mics. And that makes sense because amps finally have master volume knobs, so you don't have to wake the dead just to get a good sound, and the ribbons will survive amps at a reasonable ear-splitting volume. He can put the mic dead center and then back it off by about 6 inches, reduce the proximity effect, and actually capture the sound of the entire cabinet. And yeah, the results sound awesome. Go check out some of the records he's made. I also highly recommend the video, especially if you're tired of your guitar sounding like a dog barfing into a shoebox. But here's the catch. You don't own a vintage RCA ribbon mic because you're broke. And why are you broke? Because you spent $5,000 on a guitar crafted from sacred tonewood by blind monks at Stonehenge during solstice. And now you're wondering why your recordings sound like a box full of bees. Let's get this straight. When you're recording guitars, you start with the speaker, and then the mic, and then maybe the amp, and then maybe some pedals. And then way down at the other end of the line, you get to the guitar. Despite what the people at Guitar Center told you, despite what your favorite YouTuber said between Raid Shadow Legends ads, despite what the SM57 cult insists while holding up their one microphone like it's the Ark of the fucking Covenant. Look. The SM57 is not a gift from Crom. It is a primitive, blunt object we keep using because it refuses to die. It is the cockroach of microphones. It's not accurate and it is not flattering. It just exists. It's like glitter at a strip club. So what is the prospective home recorders to do after years of tweaking mic positions by 0.5 millimeter and still getting garbage tone? Simple, because Roswell finally fixed the problem. Now what you're hearing there is just the amplifier. No EQ to make it sit in a mix. No multi-band compression to tame the palm mutes. No extra mic to tame the fuzz. Just the amp as it sounds in the real world. So I've been working with Roswell for the last few years. They make some extremely cool stuff. The Mini K47s, the Guitarist, the Delphos, all really fancy, all very, ooh, look at me, I'm a microphone with soul. No, seriously, they're really great stuff. Now, personally, I like the Delphos on guitar cabs, especially when you blend it with the 57 to take the fizz out of your guitar tone. Because let's face it, if you're listening to modern metal mixes, a lot of the guitars kind of sound like somebody deep fried a Hornet and threw it into your ear canal. But this new cab mic, this is something very different. Let's take a look. It's like Roswell said, what if we did the Steve Albini thing, but with a condenser that doesn't immediately have a nervous breakdown and doesn't cost $3,000? Because if you've ever mic'd a cab with a condenser, you know the first thing you do is dive for that gain knob like you're disarming a bomb, and then you spend 45 minutes trying to get it in phase with the 57. Oh, it's so much fun. The Roswell cab mic changes all of that. They brought in a revolutionary new concept for condensers. It's called headroom. You know, the thing that most condensers don't have because they're designed to record flutes and polite whispers, not 120 decibels of sonic napalm coming boiling out of your 4x12. This is a mic that doesn't clip, it doesn't whine, and it doesn't throw a tantrum the second you crank up a tube amp. It's got a much flatter frequency response as well. Kind of like a ribbon mic, but without a please don't breathe near me fragility, or the price tag. Now this means you're gonna get the sound of your actual amp, not the sound of a mic having an existential crisis. No proximity effect voodoo, no millimeter level mic placement, no guesswork. Just plug it in, point it at the center of your favorite speaker on your guitar cab, pull it back 6 to 8 inches, and go make something that doesn't sound like absolute dog shit. It's almost like if somebody at Roswell said, hey, what if we just made this easy? Let me show you what I mean. All right, so I moved out into the performance room of the studio. This is where I got all my cabs and stuff lined up. And I want to show you guys exactly what's going on here. I've got my angle cab with those lovely new Slush and Vintage 30s. So you can see here's the center of the speaker, and I've got the cab mic lined up maybe about 7 or 8 inches back from it. And that's all there is to it. It really is that simple. Let me show you what I mean. Here's the other part of the video you don't see. That's my camera back there behind a teleprompter. And what I've got is my amps over here, and we're going into a bad cat. And look at where I've got the EQ set, maybe a little bit rolled back on the bass. The mids are just a little bit above noon, and treble's a little bit higher. And the presence is cranked up a little bit. That's it. And I've got that going into a clean 10-band EQ. This thing is dirt cheap. I picked this up off Amazon for under $100 Canadian. Works like a champ, really does the thing. And that's all the signal processing I've got going on here. I mean, I'm just going into Neve channel 12 here. I got a little bit of phantom power on. That's it. No roll off, no nothing. Let me show you exactly what kind of sound we're getting with that setup. Here's the thing, there's a few videos on the cab mic already kicking around out there, but none of them are about high gain. And that's the thing I'm here for. I want to hear how this thing's going to work when I plug in and play the kind of music I like. Okay, just for the record here, the only processing going on there is I've got some Eventide reverb and a little bit of delay going on as well. That's with the wonderful H9000, but there's no EQ. That's the sound of the freaking amp. That's insane. There is absolutely no fizz going on there whatsoever. And even if I crank up the presence, okay, I just brought the presence up to like 10 o'clock and I brought the treble up just a little bit more. There's like no fizz going on there at all. I'm not going to have to fight to get this guitar sound to work in a mix. And that is the biggest thing I see said on this channel in the comments over and over and over again is like, Glenn, I really like the sound of my amp in the room, but I can't make it translate into a mix. What do I do? Well, that problem might finally have been solved. Check this out. This is just the amp in the mix with no EQ or any extra processing going on. Hit it! All right, I'm over here at the desktop. I want to show you exactly what's going on. Sound demos are great, but if I could actually show you measurements and see what's happening to the sound, this is always a little bit easier to digest. So what we're looking at here is the capture of the cab mic as I showed you out in the room. And what I got here is a Slush and Vintage 30 with the 57 dialed in to absolute perfection. Those are those new made in UK Vintage 30s that I really love so much. But that's with a typical 57 in a typical sweet spot that I would use on a recording session. This is, you know, what I've learned after many years of trial and error. And it's a pretty interesting shift we got going on here. And if we start comparing the two, this is where things get weird. Even though that we've got the cab mic backed off here, that's the gray one here, it's actually got more bottom end going on. Weird. Everything in the 100 to 400 hertz region is pretty close until we start getting up to about, you know, there's a little less going on in the mids here on the 57. That might have to do with the fact that it's moved away from the cap center. But if you look here, the cab mic has got a massive dip going on at 1 kilohertz right up to 1.2K. And we're talking anywhere from 98 to say down to 84. Wow. So we're talking 13, 14 dBs quieter at 1K. Interesting, because 1K can be a little nasty sound, a little boxy sounding. Weirdly enough, the 57 has a dip at 2.84K. But this is where I found it really interesting, is in the fizzies, as I hate to call them. If we look at 5 and 6K, this is where it gets really interesting, because the 57 is at about 101 dBs here, but it's down to like 86. So what are we talking? 15 decibel difference at 5K? That's not insignificant. And again, we get to about 6K. We're at about roughly 92 versus 80. So 12 dBs difference, maybe 11 and a half. That's absolutely nuts. And then once again, when we get into the 10K region there, we're looking 85 versus 74. So 11 dBs. So in the critical guitar frequencies, the parts you're usually going to want to tweak with an EQ, they're not causing problems even to begin with. And that way we can get a clearer picture of the guitar amp. And that's why it's going to work in a mix better, is because when you introduce EQ, you're introducing phase shift. What this means is you're going to have to work a whole lot less harder to get a good guitar sound happening in your mix. Let me give you my final thoughts. To say I wish this had come out way back in 1998 is the understatement of the crom-damn century. This mic would have saved me years of grief. I'm talking about late nights hunched over a notebook while working my shifts at Chrysler, iPod in one hand, scribbling down EQ tweaks to try when I got home, and desperately trying to figure out how to fix the ear-piercing ice pick I called a guitar sound. And now here comes the Roswell cab mic, quietly doing the one thing every SM57 fanboy refuses to admit is even possible: solving the problem. Now, it's $399, and yes, that's about 4 times what you're going to pay for an SM57, but let's be honest here, you are not going to stop at just a single 57. You buy that thing, then realize your tone sounds like somebody frying bacon in a tin can, so you add in a second mic, possibly condenser, to blend out the fizz, and then you get to learn all about phase cancellation. Then some genius on gear slots convince you that your preamps aren't good enough, and so you start chasing that dragon. And then, of course, you're going to want a Dynamount, because moving a 57 1mm in any direction changes your tone more than your last 6 pedal purchases combined. And suddenly your cheap mic solution setup costs $2,000 plus 18 months of trial and error and at least 3 existential crises. Or, hear me out, you spend $399, place the mic dead center on your speaker, back it off by about 6 inches, hit record, and get on with your life. It's not magic, it's not vintage, it just works. And Crom helped me, that is exactly what I could have used 27 years ago. Which add in an those tones came from speakers that were at least just a squeeze. Amps finally have Vim, and despite what the guys at Guitar Center